The automatic doors slid open slowly as an older man stepped into the hardware store, leaning gently on his cane. His walk was steady but slow, the kind of slow that told a long story without saying a word. He didn't dress in anything fancy, just a simple jacket, clean shoes, and a calm expression that had a lifetime of discipline behind it. Some customers glanced at him for a moment and went back to their shopping. The morning was normal, just like any other day. People moved in and out with carts full of wood, paint, tools, and all the things people buy without thinking twice. But this man moved carefully, almost like each step carried a memory. He wasn't there to draw attention. He only needed a few items, small tools to fix a few things in his home. Things he normally wouldn't fix himself anymore, but today he felt determined. Maybe he wanted to feel useful again. Or maybe he just missed doing the things he used to do with ease. Either way, he walked, aisle by aisle, quietly searching. At the service desk near the front, a small group of young workers stood together. They weren't busy. They were leaning on the counter, talking about weekend plans, upcoming sales, online videos, everything except work. When they saw the older man hobbling toward the aisles, their eyes followed him with a kind of careless interest. One of the workers nudged the other and whispered something with a smirk. Another laughed lightly, trying to hide it behind his hand. They weren't loud enough for the customers to hear, but their tone had a sharpness to it, the kind of tone that carried disrespect disguised as humor. The veteran, however, heard it. He didn't react. He had learned long ago that reacting didn't change people's hearts. Instead, he simply continued walking, lifting his chin slightly. Carrying himself with quiet dignity, he reached the tools section, but the labels and shelves were confusing. Things weren't where they used to be. He needed help, so he turned and headed back toward the counter where the workers stood. When he approached them, two looked away, pretending to be busy. One checked his phone. Another tapped randomly on the keyboard. The veteran stood there patiently, waiting for someone to acknowledge him. "Excuse me," he said in a calm, steady voice. "Could one of you help me find a small wrench set?" For a moment, no one responded. Then finally, one of the workers sighed loudly, making it clear he didn't want to help. "There's signs everywhere," he muttered, without even looking up. "Just follow them." The veteran pressed his lips together gently. He didn't want trouble. He just needed guidance. "I tried looking," he said. "I think I'm missing it." The workers exchanged looks. One of them laughed under his breath, then whispered something so quietly that only the group heard it. Their small circle chuckled again. The veteran didn't comment. His eyes stayed calm, almost too calm. He'd faced things far worse than rude workers. Life had taught him patience. "Sir, it's in aisle 9, one worker finally said, in an annoyed tone, pointing lazily, but not moving from his spot. "Thank you," the veteran replied softly. He turned slowly and walked back toward the aisles. The workers watched him go, and as soon as he was a few steps away, one of them exaggerated a slow, dragging walk. Pretending to use an imaginary cane, the others snickered, trying to hold back their laughter. A customer nearby raised an eyebrow, noticing their behavior, but not wanting to get involved. Moments like this happen often when people see something wrong but stay silent, unsure of how to respond. The veteran reached aisle 9 and looked around, searching for the wrench set. He scanned the shelves again and again, but couldn't find what he needed. The small tools were placed too high for him, and lifting his arms for too long made his shoulder ache. Still, he didn't complain. He knew he could ask for help again. But after the way he had been treated, he didn't want to trouble anyone. He believed in respecting others. Even when they didn't respect him, he continued searching for several minutes until he finally spotted something that looked close to what he wanted. He leaned his cane against the shelf, reached up slowly, and grabbed the small box. His hand shook slightly, the way hands tremble when they've gone. Through years of strain and effort, he placed the box carefully into his small shopping basket and moved slowly toward the checkout counter. When he approached the payment area, he realized the same workers were now handling the registers. A quiet heaviness settled in the air as he stepped forward. They saw him again. Their looks of boredom returned almost instantly. One worker scanned his items without greeting him. Another worker at the next register peeked over and whispered something to his friend, making him chuckle. The veteran could guess it was something about him. He reached for his wallet, but his fingers trembled. Not from fear, just age. His hands didn't move like they used to. He kept his movements slow and steady, but the workers noticed. "Need help with that?" One worker said in a tone that didn't sound helpful at all. It sounded like mockery wrapped in fake concern. The veteran didn't answer. He pulled out the money carefully and placed it on the counter. The worker sighed again and counted the money with exaggerated slowness, as if punishing him for taking time. "You need a bag?" the worker asked flatly. "No, thank you," the veteran said quietly. "I can carry it." The worker shrugged and looked away. Immediately returning to his conversation with the others, the veteran picked up his items, holding them close to his chest, and turned to leave. The moment he took his first step toward the door, something unexpected happened. The front door slid open again, but this time, the atmosphere changed instantly. A group of men walked in, calm, strong, disciplined, wearing uniforms that carried weight. Their presence was almost commanding, but not loud. It was the kind of presence that came from years of training, sacrifice, and teamwork. They were Navy SEALs. Their steps were firm, their eyes steady, and they moved with quiet confidence. Customers turned to look. Even the workers straightened up unconsciously when they recognized the uniforms. The SEALs were there to pick up some training equipment the store had prepared. They walked toward the front desk. Then something caught their attention. The veteran. He was standing near the exit, adjusting one of his bags with difficulty. He didn't notice the SEALs yet, but they noticed him. One of the SEALs stopped in his tracks. His expression softened immediately. Without saying a word, he nudged another member of his team and nodded to Ward. The veteran thought all of them looked. They recognized something in him. The posture. The scars, the calmness, the quiet strength. They understood, and before the workers or customers could even process what was happening, the leader of the SEAL team stepped forward, walked past the counter, past the workers, straight toward the veteran. He approached him with respect, stopping right beside him. Then, in front of the entire store, he gave the veteran a respectful nod, almost like a silent salute. "Sir," the SEAL said calmly, "let us help you." The whole store fell silent. The workers stared, frozen. Customers paused mid-step. Something had shifted. Something big, and the moment wasn't over yet. The moment the veteran stepped out of that small cafe, the cold air hit his face, but it wasn't the wind that bothered him. What stung more were the words he had just heard inside. He tried to push them away, but they echoed in his mind. He reminded himself that he had dealt with far worse in life. Years of service had taught him how to stay steady, even when people tested his patience. But this time, something felt heavier. Maybe because he had walked in just wanting a warm drink and a little peace, nothing more. He moved slowly toward the bus stop, holding onto the metal railing as he lowered himself onto the bench. His knees hurt from the old injury, and lifting his leg always required effort. Still, he didn't complain. He looked around, almost hoping the bus would arrive early today. But of course it didn't. It never did. A young delivery guy stopped nearby, waiting for his bike to be loaded. He glanced at the veteran for a moment, then quickly looked away. The veteran didn't blame him. Most people didn't know how to act around someone with visible injuries. But he wished, just for once, people would look past the disability and see the person. Back inside the cafe, the mood had suddenly changed. The workers who had been laughing earlier were now whispering to each other, looking toward the entrance as if something unexpected had happened. Customers turned too, confused, wondering why everyone seemed so alert. The bell above the door rang again. That's when a group of people walked in, men and women with a certain presence. The kind that instantly shifted the atmosphere of a room. They weren't loud or aggressive. In fact, they moved with surprising calmness. But there was something about their posture, their confidence, the seriousness in their eyes. Anyone who had ever seen active-duty soldiers or elite military members recognized that look. These weren't ordinary customers. They were trained, disciplined, and used to stepping into difficult situations with zero hesitation. The workers stiffened. A few tried to straighten their aprons, pretending they had been busy. One leaned over the counter and whispered, "Why are they here?" Another shrugged, trying to act casual, but failing miserably. One of the new arrivals stepped forward. He looked around the room carefully, not missing a single detail. Then he pointed to a chair, asking politely if it was taken. The customers nearby quickly shook their heads and moved aside. No one wanted to be in the way. The eldest among them approached the counter and ordered coffee for the whole group. His voice was calm, but there was a strength behind it that made the cashier instantly stop scrolling on her phone and start working properly. The workers exchanged nervous glances, unable to understand what was going on. Just a few minutes earlier, they had been laughing at a disabled veteran who had done nothing to them. Now the room was filled with people who clearly respected service, discipline, and sacrifice, qualities the workers had just mocked. The irony hung in the air so heavily that even the customers felt it. While they waited for their orders, two of the newcomers stepped outside. They had seen the veteran sitting at the bus stop. They didn't hesitate. They walked straight to him with steady steps, hands in their jacket pockets, not wanting to alarm him. When they reached the bench, one of them gently asked, "Sir, do you mind if we join you?" The veteran looked up, surprised. He didn't recognize them personally, but he immediately sensed who they were. Their presence felt familiar, the same discipline, the same quiet confidence he once carried. He nodded, and they sat down. For a moment, no one spoke. The wind picked up softly, brushing past them. Then one of the men asked, "Sir, were you inside that cafe a moment ago?" The veteran hesitated, then nodded again. He wasn't embarrassed. He had been treated worse in his life. But he wasn't eager to talk about it either. The second visitor leaned forward slightly. "We saw what happened," he said quietly. "You handled it with more patience than most people would." The veteran didn't say anything. He wasn't the type to complain. He didn't think anyone cared about what happened to him. But for the first time in a long while, he felt seen. Not pitied, just understood. Back inside, the other members of the group waited for their drinks. They didn't joke around or chat loudly. They kept glancing outside through the window, checking on the veteran who had unknowingly drawn them there. It wasn't planned, not something they had coordinated. It was instinct. They had served with men like him, fought beside men like him, respected men like him. Seeing someone like that being disrespected instantly raised something inside them: loyalty, brotherhood, responsibility. One of the younger workers noticed them staring outside and whispered nervously, "Do you think they're here because of that guy who left?" No one answered. The silence that followed was more terrifying to them than any direct confrontation. Outside, the bus finally appeared in the distance. The veteran sighed quietly. He stood up slowly, using the bench for support. The two visitors stood up too, almost automatically. The first one asked, "Sir, do you need any help getting on? We'd be glad to assist." The veteran shook his head with a gentle smile. "I can manage," he said. His voice was calm, steady, but grateful. Before he stepped onto the bus, the second visitor placed a hand on his shoulder, a respectful gesture, not intrusive. "Sir, whatever happened in there, don't let it weigh on you. You've done more for this country than most people ever will." The veteran felt something tighten in his chest. He wasn't used to praise. He never expected anyone to acknowledge his past. He nodded again, this time with a little emotion in his eyes. When he boarded the bus, the driver glanced at the two men standing outside, and then at the veteran. The driver gave a small nod too, as if understanding something unspoken. The veteran took his seat and looked out the window just as the doors were closing. The group outside stood there, watching the bus pull away, their expressions serious but respectful. Back in the cafe, the workers continued to act as if everything was normal, but their nervous glances betrayed them. They could feel it, the shift in the room. The silent judgment from those disciplined strangers whose presence alone carried weight. They didn't dare laugh anymore. They didn't speak loudly. They tried to look busy, hoping no one would call them out. But the group didn't need to say anything. Their calm, steady demeanor already spoke volumes. Customers, too, had noticed everything. A few shook their heads quietly. Others whispered to each other about how shameful it was to mock someone who had clearly gone through so much. Word traveled quickly around the small cafe, moving from table to table. Carried through subtle looks and hushed voices, the cafe workers began to realize the consequences of their behavior. Not in the form of punishment, but in the form of respect lost. The people who had just walked in respected service, sacrifice, and courage. And they had walked in exactly when the workers had shown the opposite. Outside, the group took one last look down the street where the bus had disappeared. They stood silently for a moment, as if saluting someone whose story they didn't fully know, but whose struggle they instantly understood. Then they walked back inside the cafe, not to confront anyone, not to cause a scene, but to pick up their drinks quietly. But even without words, their presence changed everything from that day onward. The workers never forgot the feeling of that room, the shift, the weight, the realization that kindness matters. Respect matters, and mocking someone who carries invisible battles is never harmless. And somewhere, on a moving bus, the veteran sat quietly, unaware of how deeply his silent dignity had impacted a room full of strangers.